As humans, our brains are designed to process small bits of information very quickly. Only one option frustrates us, but too many options overwhelms us. So how can marketers provide the right balance of optionality for our audiences? The human brain is a fascinating tool, and playing to its strengths and biases can be powerful for marketing leaders. Marketing and sales are full of myths, misconceptions, and sometimes brain science. Join us as we get out of the echo chamber and discuss the delicate balance of decision-making and optionality.
Hello and welcome to the Rethink Marketing Podcast, where we strive to provide unique insights in an engaging way. I'm Paul Frodge, joined by Mr. Marketing, and for today's conversation, the arguer of additional autonomy, Colin Jeffries. Colin, how are you doing today?
I feel like starting an argument, apparently, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing really well. It's been a good week.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Paul, what exactly is it that we're rethinking today?
Yeah, so we had a great conversation with Nancy Harhut last week on our podcast, and we got into a little bit of conversation about autonomy bias and how humans crave control, but are also easily overwhelmed by too many options and choices. So, how do we strike that balance? And I'd like to talk about that a little bit more today.
Absolutely. I think you did a great job teeing it up. And again, if anyone of our listeners today has not heard the Nancy Harhut conversation, would encourage you to go back and listen to that. She offered a lot of insight on a wide range of topics related to behavioral science and marketing. But today, to your point, Paul, let's dive in and talk a little bit about autonomy bias, because as humans, we do want to have some level of control, or at least perceived control, but we're very quickly overwhelmed by high optionality. Our brains are made to effectively process small quantities of information in a way where that information is easily juxtaposed. So I think about color selection. We could talk about the very popular SUV, the Toyota RAV4. It has 4 interior trim colors: ash, mocha, black, nutmeg. It has 9 exterior colors, and then there are some two-tone options. When I think about 4 interior trim colors, it's easy for my brain to think, do I want ash? Do I want mocha? Do I want black? Or do I want nutmeg? I can pick between those 4 options, but 16 options on the exterior, that's a lot to choose from, and it's much more difficult for our brains to process that. When we look at some best of breed brands, think Tesla, Apple, etc., the iPhone 16, for example, has 5 color options, and it only has 3 levels of storage, because our brains can very easily juxtapose or compare directly those 5 color options. Do I want it in pink? Do I want it in white? Do I want it in black? Our brain recognizes, here's the advantage of black, here's the advantage of white, here's the advantage of pink, etc. Or disadvantages, as the case may be. For storage options, our brain might not necessarily know the difference between 126 gigabytes of data and 512 gigabytes of data, for example. So giving us 3 options there. Now, obviously, there are benefits from a manufacturing and a sourcing perspective, but it provides just the right number of choices for buyers.
I would agree with that. You go back to the Toyota RAV4 example that you mentioned, Colin, and I look at that, and it's not just those 4 options and then 16 options. How we teed up the episode about brain science, it's like, what is that actually? If you do one trim color and one exterior color, and then this exterior color with this trim color, it's a lot more than just 16 after you go through all of that. And I think about years ago when we probably bought our first vehicles and sitting in the showroom and being able to go through all that. I was always wondering why it took so damn long to pardon my French, but it took so long to go through that sales process with the salesperson and then the sales manager. It's a lot easier now when you can do it all online and order your vehicle however you want, but still looking at that and looking at all those options online can be frustrating at times because you don't know which one to choose. So it's interesting to talk about the different options when it comes to making it easy. And those that are doing it well, like Apple, like you talked about, is doing it very well. And I think about my own personal experience when it comes to choosing a new phone, choosing a new car, choosing whatever it is. I like it to be a lot easier than a lot more options. But where is that balance that we talk about?
That's a great point. I mean, we talked about the RAV4. Tesla's a very popular car. They come in 5 standard colors, and that has actually increased from, I think the base was 3 standard colors not too long ago. So, Paul, to your point, when we're looking at this, we'll take the iPhone as an example. Apple's giving us, and Apple, known for design, known for ingenuity, known for just basically being easy to work with, so to speak, as far as technology goes, they're giving us a lot of different options, 5 colors times 3 levels of storage. But when we actually get into that, it's not 3 to the exponent of 5. It's really one choice at a time. So you're picking the color first. You have 5 direct comparisons on color. Your brain can process those and can pick easily. Then you have 3 direct comparisons on levels of storage. Again, your brain can figure out what it wants to select. Many businesses take the 3 model and they have a good, better, best. And so they'll have a low memory or a low expense, a mid memory or mid expense, and a high memory, high expense, or high processing speed, high expense, high service, whatever you want to do. They have that good, better, best model. And that works pretty well for more complex decisions. But sometimes, again, colors, up to 5 options could be really good because our brain can process 5 color comparisons. That gives us the, I'll say illusion, but in a lot of instances, we actually do have the decision making power. It plays into that autonomy bias, which can be huge. But for something more complex, let's say we're selling B2B and there's a longer implementation timeline, maybe instead of giving someone 3 or 5 or almost an infinite number of options, instead we say, hey, we usually bill net 30, but we offer a 1% discount for invoices that are paid on arrival. Which one works best for your team? And then we can send the invoice appropriately. But that's something where it's a little bit more complex. They have to deal with, time value of money and discounting and those sorts of things, maybe even budgeting at some level. It's a more complex decision than what color do you want your iPhone. So we give them 2 options instead of 5.
Interesting scenario when you talk about B2B versus a car, for example. And thinking about it a little bit more in depth, people, I think, want, if it's something that's going to be theirs and they own it and they want it to be uniquely authentic, things like that. So I think about that in the RAV4 example now that I'm thinking about it a little bit further. And I'm like, if it's a car, I think I would rather have more choices, but from a salesperson's perspective, to my point earlier, it might take longer through the sales process. So when you think about B2B and giving them options, a good, better, best, a SaaS model that we talked about with Nancy on our last episode, that is set up for the scenario that that particular company is been used to, has had success with, and gives really a choice of that good, better, best model. So I think about that in a little bit more with something that might be mine personally versus a transaction or a partnership of some sort when it comes to B2B. So it's interesting to think about the two different scenarios there.
Absolutely. You bring up something too that makes me think about a discounting strategy or a financing strategy too, Paul. Paul, I think about manufacturers, and oftentimes when they're buying equipment, they'll have a conversation with the person selling the equipment that is, hey, we can discount the equipment to by say 10%, or we can offer financing at a locked in interest rate. There are a lot of elements here where instead of giving someone an infinite number of options, right? Well, we can finance it at 3% and here's what we can discount it, or we can finance it at 4%, here's the discount, or we can finance it at 5%, here's the discount. Or like, hey, you have 2 options. We can discount it at this amount, or you can finance it at this APR, right? So when we're able to take more complex things and delineate them down into here are 2 options and they're very different, so your brain can compare them easily, that's something else that we should touch on is the more nuanced the decision, the more difficult it is for a brain to say this is best, this is worst. If it's very clear juxtaposition, we can say, oh, time value of money for this is much better than taking the discount on the back end or what have you.
Yeah, when it comes to the brain science and the autonomy bias and looking at all this, it's interesting to dive a little bit deeper because as human beings, and we talked about this with Nancy, we really want to have a choice. And when the choice is A, B, or C versus fill in the blank, it's very difficult to fill in the blank. So it's nice to be able to say, I don't really like that option. I like this option. Or if from a sales side of things, if you really want them to gravitate towards the middle, like we talked about before with the good, better, best model, being able to provide not really a whole lot in that minimized package, but really what they're looking for in that middle package and extending just a little bit further for a customized or enterprise solution.
That's exactly right. I mean, Paul, I'll maybe put words in your mouth a little bit, but I know from your radio days, you mentioned how salespeople might struggle to go out with a blank slate and sell radio. But if there's a sponsorship related to a Major League Baseball team or a National Football League team or the Olympics or something else that's being broadcasted on traditional media, it's a lot easier for them to go sell it because they have, hey, here's sponsorship package number one, sponsorship package number two, and sponsorship package number three, and they're able to go sell those because the buyers can easily compare them. They're not going out there with a carte blanche and saying, "Hey, we can build anything you want. What do you want?"
No, it totally makes sense, especially those that are not used to buying radio in that example, or they don't really know what the options are. It's for that example, it's really productizing versus just having selling air or airtime. So you're really able to really put their logo or their brand attached to the NFL or to college football or whatever you're talking about there. But it really gives it more of a sexy approach versus being able to just say, "Hey, would you like to buy a 30-second radio commercial?"
So, Paul, you brought up something really important that I don't want to gloss over, which is productizing. For somebody that's maybe they don't have a menu of services right now, they're the restaurant where somebody walks in and they can order whatever's on their mind. How do they put together a menu?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to speak necessarily on certain industries, but looking at this, just like a restaurant, there's choices. It's right there. There's options. There's that choice to say I want the steak, the burger, the chops, whatever else for that night. And when it comes to, let's say, a service-based business, the opportunity to provide that menu for somebody should be based on expertise, experience, the opportunity to say, these are the things that have worked for these clients in the past and it was measurable, and we are going to do these things on a month in and month out basis to hit those KPIs that you're looking for that ROI. So looking at that and saying, okay, these really, I have a choice. I could go to the smallest package and be able to say, okay, this is the grassroots efforts of whatever I'm going to provide, but you could move up to this middle tier and it's going to provide some additional opportunities, but really list out what the measurable deliverable is with that middle package. And then maybe, look at a higher price package or an enterprise package that's going to deliver a full suite of everything that you're going to do. But be transparent, is my opinion. Make sure that both the buyer and the seller know exactly what is being done on a month in and month out basis. And also, if it's a product, to be able to highlight what you're getting from that product, as opposed to just saying, here's the product that's being delivered. Being able to really understand, the features, the benefits, so forth and so on.
Well said, Paul. I think there's a lot of insight there that many of our business, or many of our listeners, hopefully, many of our businesses can learn from. The way that I think I'll frame this up is, you have Apple, you have Tesla, you have Toyota, Google, a lot of these organizations that are doing a substantial amount of research that understand human behavior and neurology better than most of us individually or most of our organizations. We can learn a lot from what they're doing without having to spend a lot of time or effort A/B testing and multivariate testing and doing a lot of first party research and all this stuff. We can look at Google business profiles and see, hey, for a complex choice like picking an auto mechanic, picking a daycare, picking even a restaurant, Google gives us three options. And it shows a lot of information within those three options, right? Is it busy? Is it open? What's the price point? How close is it to you? Proximity, all those things. But it's giving people three options in the map pack. And if we go over to Google Maps, maybe it'll give us 4 or 5 options, but it's not giving us 200. And we can look at that as business owners and marketing leaders and step back and understand, hey, if I give people 0 options, I'm not playing into their autonomy bias and the desire for control. If I give them 2 options, maybe for highly complex, really difficult decisions, things like 12 months, same as cash, or 20% off, right? Those are easy to juxtapose, easy to compare, and easy for people to make decisions on. Then we move into the category of maybe 3. That's something where it's a little bit less complex. We're picking dinner, we're picking show times, we're picking things like that, where there's a little more complexity than color, but there's less complexity than finance terms or something of that nature. And then we move into a grouping of 5, which is perfect for color, where it's a pretty cut and dry decision. So we'll think about 2 options, 3 options, 5 options. And I would argue that neurologically, from a behavioral science perspective, more than 5 options might be too many. Paul, anything to say before we wind this episode down?
Yeah, I think to boil it down and get out of business and look at something in everybody's personal life that you're dealing with on a day in and day out basis, and especially if you have a spouse, and I know I deal with this every day with kids and everything else. It's like, what do you want for dinner? Let's just autonomy bias. What would you like for dinner? Nobody in my family can make a decision, but if I say, hey, would you like A, B, or C? Some Everybody makes a choice, right? It might not all be the same choice, but they're all picking something. And so I think that's what we're getting at in the simplest form is just being able to give consumers in the business world, business sense, a choice. It's a lot easier for them to make that decision. Otherwise, we might be having months and months of conversation about moving forward to the next level and not getting anywhere.
Well said, Paul. Well said. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation on the Rethink Marketing Podcast. Until next time, keep rethinking those common assumptions and the balance between autonomy bias and optionality. We'll catch you next week. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If people want to connect with us, where should they go, Paul?
RethinkMarketingPodcast.com, Colin. What can listeners do to help us in return for the sage marketing wisdom and our pithy humor?
They can help us by leaving a review on their favorite platform or sharing this episode with a fellow marketer to help them cut through the clutter.
Well, until next time, keep rethinking those common assumptions.